I've created what I call an enchanted space. It's about retrieving our magic. It's about remembering we are magic, and that the only thing that is more powerful than AI and the warmongering machine and politics and all, right? And we know this as spiritual people, is to cut right through and not just know that spirit is there, but work from spirit. So we're working with spirit through the body.
Hi, and welcome to the Conscious Marketer Podcast. I'm Richard and also joined by Kylie. Hi, Kylie.
Hi.
And today we're super excited to be talking to someone who helps writers. And I'm currently writing my book. And I know, Kylie, you have a book planned in the future too. We're going to introduce you to Tanya Taylor Rubinstein. She developed somatic writing as a way for her students to become embodied writers. By holistically retrieving voice, untethering power, and writing stories, they're able to experience profound personal connection to their work. Hi, Tanya. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm so happy that you and Kylie invited me today.
Yeah, it's fun, and I know a lot of our audience, they want to write a book someday, or they're actively involved with writing on social media and doing videos. So super excited to be hearing more about your somatic writing process. Maybe you can share a little bit of your background and how you came to kind of come up with this process and a little bit of your backstory.
Well, sure. So somatic writing is really a phenomenological process, which means really coming through the body. It arises from the body, from our lived experience. So I work with people very specifically on both memoir and more like nonfiction, where it's their memoir, their story, but they're weaving in some kind of a process. But I started as an actor, actually, and an actor because to me it's such a somatic art form. It makes so much sense, right? We're accessing through our bodies and through our senses a different kind of memory, and it's so alive. But all I wanted to do from the time I met my mentor, the late Spalding Gray, who was a storyteller when I was 19 years old, was tell my own stories. So I made a jump in my late 20s from acting to storytelling, because I realized I wasn't so interested in being behind the mask of the artifice that is required in being an actor. I wanted to tell my stories, and I wanted to create space for others to tell their stories, which I ultimately did. So I started as a storyteller, and then life happened, and I actually when I went through a divorce to my daughter's father when she was 2. I really had no idea I was going to support myself as a, at that point, solo performer in Santa Fe. And I had a dream, and the words came to me, the cancer monologues. And I was really this was, I don't know, almost over 20 years ago. I was downloaded with a process about using storytelling, our lived experiences, to work with people with cancer. And I saw the vision over Lincoln Center in New York, and I just through that felt my way into that, and ended up doing those workshops with over 300 people who'd experienced cancer. It became a book called The Cancer Monologue Project. It was published by McAdam Cage in the Bay Area back in 2002. And that really set my work on a very interesting path. And for many years, I did a show off Broadway, Cancer Monologues. I did workshops all over the country with hospitals, cancer centers. I was curious to see if the process would work just as well for other kinds of people. And I started working with veterans who had very extreme PTSD from like 4 different wars in the US and in Europe, the Middle East. It was and I work with, speaking it's so timely in the news, I ended up working with Israeli, Palestinian, Arab Israeli young women, bringing them together they had been brought together at a peace camp to tell their stories on stages. And that was when I realized not only the power of personal storytelling to awaken and heal and radically, right, like allow us to reclaim our power and pull in our intergenerational trauma. I didn't even have words for it at the time, but that's what was happening. Intergenerational trauma, transmuting it to really our ancestral gifts. But it was also I just wrote a piece about this on Facebook today, a way outside of politics, outside of sort of the whole space-time continuum of how we meet violence and intergenerational trauma on a systemic level. And when I put those in particular, the Israeli, Arab Israeli, who are treated sort of very much like second-class citizens, it's like very racist, and Jewish Israeli young women on stages, and all the parts of the story were represented. All the trauma, here comes all the Holocaust intergenerational trauma, here comes all the Palestinian, we're living outside of our, don't have rights in our homeland, the whole thing, the Arab Israeli girls who I didn't even know about their stories. There it all was. But what was important was when they were getting a standing ovation from about 500 people in the audience, and all of their stories were being witnessed equally. They were each standing in a place of belonging. Makes me cry even to this day. They raised their hands up together to take a collective bow. We went up on stage and gave each one a rose. And in that moment, because I think a lot about chaos theory, a fractal emerged. And so that fractal that came out of all the chaos in their monologues when each one was listened to was something that is very different than the way we approach conflict, individually, familial, and globally. So my work has been sniffing out a path. I work very somatically from the gut, from my body, bringing in my ancestors. These days, talking to the descendants who are really waiting in the spirit realm for us to be listening to their voices too, and including them in conversations to create spaces. So yes, I work professionally. Somatic writing is about books, writing your books. I've worked with tons of actors writing their stories, people doing off-Broadway shows, theater festivals all over the world. But at the heart, the work is not just about writing our books. It's about actually retrieving our ancestral intelligence, transmuting the trauma, 5,000 years of patriarchal trauma. And then, of course, there's individual trauma, Jewish trauma, Palestinian trauma, gifted trauma, neurodivergent trauma, racist trauma. And it depends where we land on that spectrum, but it's like we can become our own fractal and tell a story that actually can cut through the lies in the narratives in the culture. So I went a lot of places there. I hope that gives you a little bit.
No, that's amazing. I didn't know any of that about you. I knew a lot about your career, but I didn't know you did any of that. So I'm super just like wowed by it all. And you said something in there that I thought was super important. You talked about storytelling and belonging. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
I can. One of my teachers, which is not just a teacher, it's a process. I started 15 years ago doing the Hellinger work, family ancestral constellation work, because I had just this intractable knot. And by that, I mean just this hole I kept falling into. Like, no matter what I did, no matter how much therapy, no matter how many past life regressions, no matter how many shamanic teachings, I just kept landing face down in a hole around relationships, personal relationships. I've been married and divorced 3 times at that point. And interestingly, it was the thing I wanted the most. And I tend to think our intractable knot is the thing we want the most. And on some level, whether that's love, whether that's success, whatever. So I started doing ancestral constellation work, which of course it was developed by Bert Hellinger in Germany, but he lived with the Zulu people in Africa. The work is indigenous work. the African people in particular, but actually also indigenous people all over the world, but the root is Africa, right? Because of the oldest, the connection to the root system, the mother tree in Africa, if we want to go all the way down to the dark feminine and the goddess. And that work is all ancestral work. And it is about retrieving the deepest feminine and everything that has been exiled and marginalized by systemic oppression now for, thousands of years, and about the violence we each carry in our lineage. And so when I started to do that work, I was really deeply asked to uncolonize my own voice in ways I couldn't have imagined, address my familial anti-Blackness, the unconscious racism in my line, the elitism in my line, because I had a lot of colonizers in my line, like Mayflower, those folks in my line, a really very violent Puritan colonizer in Massachusetts, did terrible things, was responsible for, participating in genocide of Native people. And when I could own that, and when I could say that without going into white guilt or shame or whatever, like everything started to change around my own intractable knot. But getting back to belonging, there is a principle in all indigenous culture, which we're so cut off from. And I always say, once upon a time, we were all indigenous to a place, but we've forgotten that. Many of those of us who are white in this culture, with all the narratives we carry, and some are some have been chased out of pogroms, from pogroms and religious persecution. There's so many layers here, Holocaust. But everyone has the right to belong, is what I learned in that work, including a perpetrator, including a rapist. We don't, in Western culture, we like to make things real black and white, good and bad. But in indigenous culture, there's a process then for, bringing people through where there's accountability, which we also don't do well, and learning and teaching and mentorship, and you're still part of the tribe. You still have the right to belong, but things aren't swept under the rug. It's not denial. It's that there's a space for belonging. And I started as I really sort of manifested the love of my life, who was so unexpected, who, Kylie Sid, who has would have been the last person. I would have not been able to see him. He's a transgender man, Richard, and just also fabulous person, but I would have never seen him and had that love had I not done this process of uncolonizing all of these beliefs. And then I started to think about realizing, how does this apply to the world and all these conflicts? And to me, it's how do we create spaces is the inquiry, and the bigger global conversations where everyone has the right to belong, but we're not enabling violence, where we're not enabling retribution. So the belonging piece is what I've been following, and it means a radical willingness to hold a lot and to understand where we're at. Is I learned it from those monologues with the young women. I learned it listening to them, the depth of the intergenerational trauma. You don't bypass that. And every war, how much is just the repeat of the ancestral trauma that just never got seen or witnessed, and is in some ways either exiling or in response exiling others.
It's kind of interesting because a lot of our work in our agency has been to help a lot of psychologists and people that have been doing a lot of that work, like Thomas Hubel, and he's been doing a lot with collective trauma.
Yes, he's wonderful, yeah.
And ancestral trauma. He's been one of our main clients. But it's definitely one of those things where, the internet and online marketing, it enables, I think there's kind of a new storytelling that's happening that actually helps people. I like your fractal, because in some ways, when you get online, you can create a fractal idea that starts to to regenerate itself and duplicate itself through consciousness. What are some of the ways that you use somatic writing and some of the work you do to make an impact and to spread out? Like what are your thoughts on how you can make a difference in the world with publishing online?
Well, I'm really right with you. And honestly, my favorite clients, I don't want to say favorite in terms of human beings, but my best clients tend to be also psychologists, trauma-informed, coaches and healers, people who have really already done so much work around this. And I feel like their personal stories, their narratives married with their experience is the most important work on the planet. And I think I'm really interested in helping more of them, like Thomas, make the move from individual practitioner into global leadership, because I actually think it's those on the front lines of trauma who are in mastery with it and have already been doing it for decades. And a lot of them sort of sometimes are hiding out or just in private practice, but to actually, have a book, because it's the way to own the leadership, and then create what I think of as an unbrand online that comes really from their lived experience and story too, not just from their mastery, but that combination of their own intimate mastery. And I think Dr. Gabor Mate does that really beautifully. We know about his Holocaust background, and he talks a lot about his trauma and different people's. And I, of course, because of 5,000 years of patriarchy, I am very radically interested in supporting women and non-binary and queer people in telling their stories, because there's got to be more female leadership and power, because I see even in the somatics world, it is still being dominated by men, even the men I love, by the way. So I'm very interested in way more matriarchs being out there owning that same level of power as Thomas Hubel, as Dr. Gabor Mate, as my very dear friend, David Bedrick. You find less household names in that realm at all that are women, or even women leading conferences. So that's sort of my personal thing, is always looking on the margins, because the further we go on the margins, the more people are represented in the work.
That's so powerful. Yeah, I love that. So when people come to you to write their book, are they already pretty dialed into this process, or do you have to really get people, how do you get people out of their heads, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We don't work from the head at all. We go into the bodies. I say the space we work in, I've created, not just me at all, amazing humans on my team, including several that are so much smarter than me and way more trained than me. I've got the great somatic practitioners, but also I've got literary writing teachers, who teach at creative writing departments and schools and some of the best writing programs, but that it's really the alchemy of the literary, the phenomenological, the really deep, intimate storytelling with getting out what I call literary bypass that happens in a lot of traditional MFA programs. And actually, but having that literary piece, the poetics, the metaphor, making meaning of our stories so our stories become more mythic, which we're living in a mythic time, whether we like it or not, whether we resist it or not. Like with AI, Josh Schrei just did a great podcast about AI, even calling us to mythic times. You can love it, you can hate it, you can be terrified, but it's like we have the capacity with technology to play God. So how are we going to match that? So it is so important to me bringing this alchemy together. So I've created what I call an enchanted space. It's about retrieving our magic. It's about remembering we are magic, and that the only thing that is more powerful than AI and the warmongering machine and politics and all, right? And we know this as spiritual people, is to cut right through and not just know that spirit is there, but work from spirit. So we're working with spirit through the body. So it's very rooted in that pulling up energy from that mother tree, the earth, working with our guts. Western culture gets very hung up on the heart, but things can become sentimental and new agey and bypassy, I find, when it's up in the heart. But from the gut, our gut is where I talk about the ancestral gut. Our ancestors had to cross lands and, like, think of how, like, what people have survived from. So to me, it's a spot of resiliency, and it gives a different perspective. And of course, when brought together with the heart, once again, there's that amazing alchemy. But the process is not difficult at all. It's simple, but for me, it's probably taken many lifetimes to
Could
find it.
you maybe give us an example? So if I wanted to get more into my gut, and I wanted to create a soul thread up to my higher self or my bigger spirit, so that, and then I connect it to my hands on my keyboard. So how do you take people through so that they can kind of like ground the soul work in their writing and their videos and their work, so that it really comes from that deep place?
Shall we do it together? Would you like to do it?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm game.
Well, go ahead and just close your eyes for a second and put one hand on your heart lung space, one hand on your gut belly, and your feet on the floor. And first, really taking a few deep breaths into the heart and lungs in deep gratitude for all the stories they carry. Feel into the awareness that every heartbreak and every moment of joy, great love and great sorrow, is all held like layers of a kind of story archaeology in this part of your body. And there's still so much hope here, right? So taking a moment to acknowledge that and invite into the space all of these stories, coming to an awareness that each one of them has belonging and the right to be here in you and with you. And then bring into this awareness the ancestral heart. All of those who you belong to, who you are the manifestation of their prayers. You're the manifestation of their desires. And they are offering you the fullness of their love and support, just really feeling into the ancestral heart and all the stories they lived through, all the heartbreaks, the falling loves, the loss of losing beloveds, and all they sacrificed for you to be here in this body at this moment. And just take a breath, letting them know that you are also representing them, that you are part of a line and an entanglement of souls that is here supporting and affirming your soul purpose, is conspiring to help you. And now dropping down into the belly, into the gut, opening to the awareness of what a place of resiliency this part of the body is. This is the part that allows us to not only digest food and extract the nutrients, but digest experiences and extract the stories and release that which no longer serves us. This is the part that can fuel us, because it's also, of course, the seat of our intuition. So just acknowledging your gut, which can often be something we take for granted, is this incredible engine that keeps driving you forward and keeps supporting you in creating more and becoming able to actually embody and hold more power more focus. I think it's where that fractal arises from the gut. And taking a moment also to acknowledge the ancestral gut and all the microbes, the invisible, beyond microscopic bacteria, like all of the threads in the body that were once carried by those that came before you. And breathing in, feeling your connection to this ancestral gut and this incredible power that allowed your ancestors to not only survive, but to be here and pass life on to you. Whether you will ever know their name or not, just acknowledging that. And taking a breath, just filling yourself up with that power. Allowing yourself to rest in that. Knowing how much more you're here to represent and how that informs your own story, but also expands it. And lastly, we'll end on this one. We could go further, but dropping into the soles of your feet. Breathing into the awareness that every day, each moment, wherever we are in the world, we are connecting to the mother, to the feminine, to the earth, which also connects us to the dead and the realms of magic, the realms of spirit that are held underground. That which has been exiled in patriarchy, where we only go up into the light, which is important to do. We'll save that for another time, but this is to go down to that which has been covered, erased. Really offering great gratitude down through the soles of your feet and asking how you can serve her, our collective, the healing of the mother, and the retrieving of that which has been marginalized and forgotten, underground, pushed underground, and breathing that back in, up through the soles of your feet, allowing yourself to feel the tingling of the awesome power as it starts to rumble underground like the roots of an old tree, like the bedrock at the center of the earth, like the underground rivers, and bring that power up into your body, receiving it. And Richard, what I would do from here is you can ask yourself when you tune into any of these centers, and of course you could use any organ, you could use any memory, you can use freeze, flight, fawn, fight or flight, freeze, trauma. You can find those places in the body, for example, which feel frozen, and you go into a writing inquiry with any of these kinds of prompts. So we always do heart, lungs, gut, belly, and the feet first. However, since I've tapped into doing some work with the descendants, not only the ancestors, because the ancestors really arise from the land, from the ground. We can travel and go back to any ancestral homelands or really sort of magically open up sit spots, those spots where we each feel very loved and we know we belong to a piece of land. Get into conversations with them, but we can use it in any way. But I wanted to share, since I've started doing work writing with the descendants, which is the piece that has come last for 3.5 years, after 20 some years as a story coach, I created this process 3.5 years ago. Created's a loose word because it really just arrived. It's very much about heart, lungs, gut, and feet. But just since we started doing writing with the descendants, which is writing about the future and listening to the future and the voices of our children and grandchildren, biological or not, all the crown is coming in now. The crown and the light, but it's coming last. And I think with a lot of spiritual bypass or religious dogma or even New Age, we want to make the crown first, the consciousness first, because it feels so awesome. This process has taught me we go all the way down into the bodies and the earth, retrieve everything. And then the last piece is going out into the galactic center, the cosmos, the opening to the all, bringing everything along with us.
I love that so much. And, I'm extra grateful that we just went through that process, because after this call, we're doing a webinar with Sounds True for like thousands of people. And now I'm all like, ooh, I'm dialed in. Like, I got this.
I love that.
Yeah. Could you share a little bit? I know on your website, there's a quote that is quite nice. It says, "The story is your contribution to the future of humanity." So I know our course with Sounds True is actually called Your Story Matters.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe share a little bit about why it's important for people to share their story and get it out there in the world for themselves and others to help others?
Oh gosh, well, I'm a true believer after experimenting for a long time. My beliefs, right? They come up from what we learn. I mean, I think story is our only inheritance. The lie is that money, the lie is that material is the inheritance. Our stories, particularly when we're in relationship with the deeper spiritual call of them, it's our inheritance, and it's what we're giving as our inheritance to those that come after. And I've worked with so many people, like with cancer. Also, I work with the HIV/AIDS community. I've worked with a lot of people looking at their mortality and end of life. And guess what? That's what, at the end of life, everyone wants to write their story, share their story, be heard. It's our true belonging. I mean, to me, I've devoted my life to it because it's the most human and at the same time most divine of medicines. And I think in terms of influence, I know, right? We know this because we're all story people. The future belongs to the storytellers, as it did to our ancestors in the ancient path. It was the storytellers, whether you're Jewish and it's the people of the book, or the more oral tradition, like the Celtic storytellers. And that's what we have. That's how we leave our mark, I think, on everything, and influence how we want that future to go.
So good. I love it so much. Everything that you're saying just is super dialed and rings so true for me. We launched a course. I actually wasn't part of it except for maybe the Facebook ads, but Richard launched a course with Thomas. It was called Your Ancestral Healing Journey or something like that. And I've always been really curious. You've mentioned the ancestors a few times in here. What do you see as being the importance of that? Like, why can't we leave the ancestral stuff out of the somatic writing process?
Well, I mean, first of all, it is an indigenous process. It was erased. One thing that's very interesting to me was particularly women who were accused of witchcraft, like in England, in the UK, the number one accusation against them was that they were speaking to the dead. That's what made them witches. They were speaking, of course, in cemeteries to their ancestors. It was ancestral veneration, which has happened everywhere in the world. We venerate our ancestors. They know they're still in relationship with us. So to be in right relationship, if we don't have connection to that sense of where we come from, whether we know their names or not. I mean, I've gone back and connected with some real ancient Scottish witches, but it came through really doing the deeper work in the line. So for me, I can say that piece again about those places we fall again and again. When we can actually do ancestral retrieval, and we may have to go very, very far back with it to find some of the well ancestors, we're really sort of jerked around by the conditioning this plane. We think our power is jobs, or give our power away to other people or to groups or this or that. Like, connecting with the ancestors, to me, is about, it's just a return to our true power and to the ways we've been cut off, to what is actually our belonging. And by ancestors, I don't just mean mother, father, grandparent, grandfather. I mean the tribal, the entanglement. Not all of our ancestors are blood ancestors. There's bloodline ancestors. There's often adopted line ancestors. There's community ancestors. There's teaching ancestors. It is this pool and this culture from where we came. We're just so cut off because we've been living in such a false and materialistic culture for so long. So it returns us. And for me, I have to say, the creative options that open up when we have access to, these other perspectives, like for me, they're the ones who show up today with me. Anything I've said that is helpful, it's likely from them, not just Tanya. It's like bringing along the community. It's like the family comes along for these bigger discussions. We've become like a individual, pull yourself up by the bootstrap culture for so long now. And we all know the emptiness of that and the exhaustion of it. So it's like, I just feel like it's so amazing to lean back on them and how different my life is.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of, it's also important to look forward to the people that come beyond us too. Totally. And by honoring the past, we honor the future. I think you're bringing so many great perspectives, because I think as a culture in the West, we've kind of forgotten that. Even today, I was walking through and just kind of giving thanks to how easy so many things are, because you take everything for granted. This has been a really wonderful call. I really enjoyed that meditation. It's interesting because I kind of feel like my journey has been from my head to my heart, and then from my heart to my my gut, and then I think I still need to connect to the earth a bit more.
You go down to the earth and I'll go out to the cosmos, and then we'll have another conversation, because I've resisted going up. So I think we all have something to lean into, and keep growing. And it's so great sharing that with you. And thank you for sharing that piece with me. And yeah, the descendants are what I'm leaning into now, because also, like you just said, I'm so grateful for technology. I was totally an early adopter. I liked it immediately. I was like, the possibilities for visionaries, we see, but how can it be used well? And what can we do now to make it that the descendants are calling us to feels like actually a really exciting question to me.
Yeah, I love it. Tanya, if people want to get a hold of you, I know you have your website, Somatic Writing. Do you do courses, or do you do coaching? How does it work?
Well, I have a class that I run every month that people do love. It's a free Writing with the Ancestor Circle, and people tend to, show up from all over the world there. This month, I'm going to do a free circle called Writing with the Ancestors, Writing with the Descendants, and it's going to be a global grief circle. So people can just shoot me off an email too. I'll pass it on to my team. I'm Tanya at Somatic Writing. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, whatnot, but they can get sort of plugged in with our free events there. And then if anybody ends up wanting to chat with me or sign up for one of our courses, they should come to Free Circle first. Probably. That's what people like to do. So, and I love them, and welcome anybody in who would resonate with it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think you're really on the cutting edge of a lot of what you're doing with writing and helping people tell their stories, and a lot of the movements you're kind of getting behind. What we'll do is we'll put all of your information on our show notes. If you're listening here, you can get those at consciousmarketer.com/podcast, and you can find Tanya's episode there. Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing your great wisdom with us today. I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you both. Thank you for creating the space for me and for Somatic Writing. And it just felt really great to be here with you all. So thank you.
Yeah. One of my favorite interviews. I love it. Can't wait to share it. So, we'll get a hold of you about that as well. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks all the listeners, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye for now.